My spouse and I saved for 5 years for our dream trip. The night before our flight, my son called and said, "My wife needs you to watch the kids." Minutes later, a text came through, "Don't be selfish. Family comes first. Cancel your trip." I stared at the message, turned off my phone, and boarded the plane anyway. When we landed, there were dozens of missed calls waiting for us. Here's what my son didn't know. Before I picked up that call, I'd already seen our texts. 2 weeks earlier, my daughter-in-law sent me her training schedule. Every date, every window where she'd be away and the kids would need coverage. I read through the whole thing the same afternoon she sent it and responded within the hour. Offered to help look into a sitter. Sent her 3 names from our neighborhood group chat. Women I knew personally, reliable, affordable. She left me on red, not a maybe, not a we'll figure it out. Nothing. That was 2 weeks before the night before our flight. The flights were booked before that. The hotels were booked before that. My husband had printed the itinerary twice because that's the kind of person he is. He likes holding something in his hands when it matters. We'd talked about this trip at Christmas in front of the whole family, including my son, including my daughter-in-law. Italy. 2 weeks. $20,800 already paid. None of it refundable. And not once in those 2 weeks did anyone call to say, "We have a situation. Can you help us think through it? Is there any way to work around your schedule?" They waited. Deliberately, I think, though I'll never be able to prove that. They waited until the bags were packed and sitting by the front door because they assumed that was when I'd told. They didn't run out of time. They chose to use none of it. I didn't yell when my son called. Didn't ask him to explain the timing or justify why now, the night before, when nothing could be undone without losing everything we put into it. I just said no. One word, and I meant it the way you mean something when you've already thought it through and landed somewhere you recognize as solid ground. He called back 10 minutes later. His voice was different. Lower, more measured, like he'd stepped out of the room and decided a different approach might work better. He started talking about money. The sitter they'd looked into wanted $400 a night. The training schedule ran 6 days. He laid out the numbers slowly, carefully, the way you do when you're building toward a conclusion you've already decided on. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I told him I understood and that I was still not canceling. He called twice more after that. The third call, he said they hadn't planned for this expense and it was going to create a real problem for them. I said I was sorry to hear that. The fourth call, the last one, his voice had dropped again, past measured, into something that sounded like a final decision. He said, "If you get on that plane, don't bother calling us when you get back." I stood in the kitchen with that. My suitcase was by the front door. My husband was outside checking the car. I thought about the girls' weekend 3 years ago that I canceled because my son said they needed me closer that week, just in case. I thought about the anniversary dinner my husband and I had pushed back twice because something came up on their end, and it felt easier to adjust my plans than to hold the line on mine. I thought about how every single time I said yes, there was no gratitude attached to it, just the quiet assumption that the next ask would be answered the same way. I picked up the suitcase and walked out. My husband didn't say anything when I got in the car. He looked at me once, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. I watched the street disappear behind us. I kept my phone in my bag at the gate, didn't look at it when we boarded, put it in airplane mode before we pushed back from the jetway and left it there for the entire flight. We landed 11 hours later. I turned the phone on in my seat while we waited for the seatbelt sign to go off. The messages came through all at once, stacking up fast. 41 missed calls, a chain of texts that started controlled and got shorter and sharper as the hours stretched. My son, my daughter-in-law. At one point, my son's name appeared 4 times in a row with nothing written, just the call logged and missed. Somewhere around 2 a.m., our time the messages stopped entirely. Then one final text from my daughter-in-law sent the following morning. The sitter cost us $800. We had to use rent money. No context, no question, just the number. Placed there like she needed somewhere to put it. I read it twice. Then I locked the screen, put the phone back in my bag, and reached over and took my husband's hand. We stood when the row cleared, pulled our bags from the overhead, and walked off the plane. They had 2 weeks. They chose to use 0 of them. Full story on the channel linked below.